Now, going on to our last keynote for today, we have Dr. Jagdish Sheth. He's padmabhushan awardee of 2020, and he's the professor of marketing, Charles H. Kelstead Professor of Marketing, to discuss emerging economies and climate action with us today.
Greetings. Thank you for inviting me to this very timely conference on India's youth's contribution to climate action. Climate action is more than climate activism. And I think with 350 million Indian young people, Indian youth, we can come out with many practical solutions to reduce global warming. Global warming is here. I'll give you some facts and figures first, suggest some approaches that companies can do, producers can do, consumers can do, and government can do. But let me give you some realities. This is what our former Prime Minister Al Gore always mentioned, the inconvenient truths. The first inconvenient truth is that climate change is real. It is not fiction, it's not imagination, it is real, shown by not only evidence, but by scientific evidence. Equally true is climate change is man-made and is a direct consequence of industrialization that has taken place over the last 200 years. During industrialization, we made three major mistakes for which we are paying price. Industrialization was necessary. It lifts the people from agricultural hard work to a little better life, better wages, better working conditions. So industrialization is a path to prosperity, but it can be done differently. What are the three mistakes? The first mistake we made was to separate production from consumption. In order to achieve economies of scale, we begin to believe in mass production, mass consumption, which means you produce so much in one place that cannot be consumed there, which means you have to store it, you have to transport it, and that all puts carbon footprint. We could have easily found a solution to make local production, local consumption, as it is true in the agricultural economies today. No storage, no transport. Second biggest mistake we made is that we felt nature is abundant. Nature is so plenty, which makes sense if you look at the population 200 years ago, especially in the Western world, where there was not that great a population. Today, the world is very different. So we began to overexploit, overutilize natural resources for industrialization, especially industrial raw materials. And a third mistake we made is to presume that industrial raw materials are inorganic. Nature is biological, it is organic, whether it is coal, iron, copper, or vegetation, makes no difference. I think the last point is very important to understand that nature can renew itself if we nurture it better. Overexploitation results into passive resistance. We have seen that with all living human beings or animal beings or any form of life, where if you try to use or abuse, they have a passive resistance. Nature slows down rather than cooperate, it begins to non-cooperate. It's basically passive resistance by saying that I don't want to work with you. I think we can change all that pretty much. It's very possible to do. More importantly, where does the carbon footprint come from? I found fascinating that carbon footprint happens more at the point of consumption, not at the point of production where we focus right now. 70% or more carbon footprint happens from homes, automobiles, refrigerations, and nearby supermarkets. We have never calculated it properly because each one contributes so little, especially in the Western world, Homes are made all from man-made materials. They're basically prefabricated homes, and they are spewing out enormous carbon footprint in addition to refrigeration at home and refrigerations in the nearby retail stores and supermarkets. While this may not be a big problem in India so far, but as India modernizes, we'll see the same thing happening in Indian context. I think that's very important to understand that it is the point of consumption where we need to focus as much as point of production. Is this reversible? Is it something that is helpless? We cannot do anything? I don't believe that. I think even today, without any new innovation, without any new approaches, climate change is reversible or global warming is reversible. And what we have to do is to really increase our awareness and our mindfulness about how to do it. There are three key actors involved in reducing the climate, global warming and reducing the impact of climate change. First one is the producers themselves, those who make products and services. And there are three key issues that they can handle, which can be done even today, either with or without economic incentives. Back to the original proposition, we must learn to localize production. Now we know in agriculture, we are doing it, what's called farm to fork, farm to home, etc. Many restaurants are now actually growing things, buying things from the neighboring farmers rather than buy 2,000, 3,000 miles away because it is cheaper, or buy from foreign countries because they are less expensive. I think it's very important to have distributed production made in small quantities in many, many locations. And today we have learned through Six Sigma, lean operations, Toyota approach in many ways, how to come out with mass customization on the one hand, but also personalization, but also making smaller quantities of production with the same economies of scale as we learn mass production technologies. Second one is to shift to renewable energy. I think it's very doable. In fact, we have seen this happen with electric cars. It seems like it's a permanent shift from the gasoline-based automobile, which creates environmental problems, and of course, nature exploitation, fossil fuel, etc. But I think electric cars clearly is a good example, and similarly, electric trucks. I think we can make our homes built in the future such that they are primarily using more renewable energy, or a combination of a regular energy, let's say natural gas, but at the same time solar panels or whatever you do it. Third key area, which can be done even today, right now, is increase biodiversity. I studied biodiversity in agriculture maybe 40 years ago. In America, at one time, we had 2,500 species of corn, had a natural biodiversity. But for the sake of greater yield per acre and greater economies of scale, that is reduced down to about 20 species. The problem is that when you reduce the biodiversity, the immunization goes away. The immunity built into biodiversity goes away. So today, corn blight, which is one disease that can wipe out corn completely. This is the biggest danger of a mass disease that can arise for plants and vegetation, for animals and for humans, as we see with COVID-19 phenomenon right now. Pandemics are very likely to happen more if you reduce the biodiversity. So biodiversity is very, very important to focus on. That's the producers. What can consumers do? I think very simple formula, we as consumers have to become more and more mindful. We should be mindful about waste that we create. And I must tell you my personal anecdote. At our home, we are vegetarians. So our largest waste is all the fruits and vegetables that we eat and whatever is left behind. At one time, we used to put it in the garbage disposal, which goes into the sewage, which goes into the waste pipeline. But one time we really figured out that we can collect all that in a container and put it out in our backyard. In 24 hours or 48 hours, not a single piece is left. There are all kinds of animals, like squirrels, whatever they are. There are vegetables, there are bugs, etc. Nothing is left. What does that tell us? Nature is the best waste organizer and manager. What can we learn? African safari, if you watch those television programs or documentaries, when a kill is made by the lion or by somebody, next day there's nothing left. Everything is useful in the nature. I think we need to learn that very clearly. And of course, the 3 R's of mindful consumption are reduce the consumption. We have societies who are over-consuming quite a lot, incredibly over-consuming. We can also recycle quite a lot, which can be possible. Not only just what I talked about vegetations and fruits, but also we can recycle durable goods, for example, recycle newspapers. We now have a mandatory requirement in my neighborhood where I have to have a separate container for recyclable items as opposed to non-recyclable items. So what goes into the landfill is very small. And of course, the last one is reuse. I am very pleased with reuse because all young generation people are now buying used clothing as a fashion. There is an absolutely incredible mindset. I don't have to have new clothing just to be with my friends, just to impress everybody else. I think this is very key. Second area is that we as young people always know how to use social media. And we know the power of social media. What can we do as consumers ourselves to not only increase our education, but awareness of our social media networks, primarily talking about climate action? What can we do? Can we create our own groups of innovative teams? We can create ideas among ourselves. So I think climate action can be easily managed and promoted through social media. And the last thing is that we must have empathy for the planet and the people. Empathy dimension is very important. Some of us are very privileged, not understanding what does it take to be a poor person or live in poverty, abject poverty, or how much planet is screaming for help at the same time. Empathy is a third dimension that I think consumers can manage. Third area, of course, is the role of government or public policy. And that's very simple. First one is that public policy has to increase awareness about the emerging problem. And the best way to increase awareness is through education, especially in primary schools. Just like we learn the 3 R's of learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic, there ought to be a fourth, which is about the environment. How environment in the ecosystem is so interesting, so important, it's so interdependent for survival as well as for thriving into the world of nature by and large. I think that awareness can increase through having a curriculum in all schools, mandatory, just as we learn a foreign language, just as we learn mathematics, or nowadays coding, for example. This is as critical and as important to do it. I also believe, in fact, that we can easily provide, governments can provide economic incentives or disincentives on the other side. For example, solar energy, wind energy, alternate energies, renewable energies. In many ways, governments can subsidize for a while before private sector is able to make it more profitable for their ventures and at the same time serve the society. And of course, we know how to provide incentives for electric cars. US has done it, and it shows you that people do like the incentives with which for them to motivate to shift from gasoline engine cars to electric cars. Finally, if nothing works, we must have mandatory rules and regulations. We can easily have mandatory rules and regulations in, for example, public transport. In many parts of India, you are not allowed to use gasoline, petrol, for example. You have to have natural liquid gas, for example, or electric or something else in terms of our two-wheelers, auto rickshaws, whatever we call them. Buses can be retrofitted or buy new buses according public transport, public buildings. Government is one of the largest enterprises, and they can put mandatory requirements on them as well as, in fact, on everybody else. So what I'm saying is that three key players or actors, producers, consumers, and the government or public policy can work to collaborate together to really get us out of this mess that is created by industrialization over the last 200 years, which is global warming. Let me stop here on this side and talk about something else. If you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, the value add is only 3 times. Commodity is about 1/3 the cost of the bread. If you take a rough diamond and polish it, a good diamond cutter increases the value, enhances the value by about 20 times, gets the brilliance out. But if you take a human being, mentor, nurture, educate, the value add is infinite. This is the youth power. 350 million young people in India. If we can properly motivate them right, make them action-oriented, not just activism-oriented. Think about the potential of how much innovation they can create, especially for the emerging market context, like India, for example, or Africa. We all have the same issues. And innovation that comes about can be commercialized or could be offered as a service by the government. So I'm very proud of India's youth. It is the future of the nation. And I have a personal story to tell you about unlocking the potential of other human beings. I'm a refugee from Burma. Before World War II, when Japan rolled over Burma on the way to conquer India, we became refugees. We come from a merchant community in India. My father had gone there to be a rice trader. We lost everything. And when we came back, we would have probably run a little family panwala business, a provision store. I'll be earning about 5,000 rupees, no education, let alone a high school education. And today, I'm an academic scholar. It's almost unthinkable that a panwala person can actually become a scholar or an educator. And it's the best thing that I've ever done, because to me, my role as an educator is primarily to unlock the potential of others. How can we make ordinary people extraordinary should be the mission of life for all of us. And young people who are watching this particular, participating in this conference, I have simply one message. Think about giving back while you're getting the blessings from your parents, blessings from the environment, blessings from the school teachers, blessings from society in general, neighborhoods. They all give you something. It is equally important to think about how can I give back? And innovation is a great platform to come out with ideas. You will have more ideas than we can ever imagine at our age. You know the context better than we do. And those ideas can be very practical to say, what can we do to reduce global warming or bring about a slowness or eradication of climate change? So we have a combination of planet, people, and prosperity all coming together. We don't have to make a trade-off. You can have prosperity and at the same time, environmental protection and environmental nurturing that can happen. Let's learn how to nurture nature. Ultimately, that is your biggest partner rather than exploit the nature. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed my presentation.